Hello everyone. Today we're going to discuss the phenomenon of elongated skulls. Who are they? From where do they come from? And what was their impact on modern human populations? Let us pass to the view of some images which will make clear what we are talking about. If the total amount of founded elongated skulls wouldn't have surpassed 2, 3 or 4 skulls, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But the thing is, the amount of elongated skulls found to this day surpasses thousands. Documented findings of such skulls took place in Americas, Eurasia, Africa, and, according to some unverified sources, even in Antarctica. So, who were these people really? The official science is very laconic on this. They say these were common normal people who had their skulls deformed in early childhood by the use of ropes and wood planks. So remains no mystery, that means no more questions. The reality is, even if it's true that some of these skulls do show visible traces of artificial deformation, in the same time there are some other elongated skulls that do not show even a slightest trace of such manipulations. They look so naturally formed. The shape of these skulls would have been so uncommon to us. Some skeptics might say that this happened because some of the people who practiced artificial cranial deformation were better skilled at this and others were less skilled. That being the main reason behind the drastic differences in the quality of the supposed artificially deformed skulls. But in the meantime, there are other things that don't really fit with this picture. One of those being, there is a hole at the base of the skull actually serves for the spinal cord to connect with the brain. To the right you have the demonstration of this hole in a normal skull, and to the left you can see the position of that same hole in an elongated skull. It's totally different. Statistically, the eyes of an elongated skull are proportionally much larger to the face if we compare the same proportions found in a normal common skull. And in most elongated skulls that show little or no deformation at all, the sagittal temporal bone is one piece, whereas in most modern humans, that bone is composed of two pieces which are joined together by the sagittal suture. The skeptics say to this that this is because the elongated skulls that are found were mostly of old men, which very old age that sagittal suture tends to visibly disappear. But to this we may ask, why is that then that as some elongated skulls, which were clearly not in old age when they died, we don't have even a slightest trace of a such sagittal suture? Here is to be noted that most elongated skulls that do not show visible traces of deformation also lack a sagittal suture. Among all the elongated skulls that are found to this day, the most extraordinary are the skulls of Paracas, South America. I shall be honest, at the moment of publication of the book Who Are We, I already knew that these guys with a long large head were hybrids of a species with a very long skull and that of normal men. What I did know is that the part of that species with a long skull is much higher in the Paracas skulls rather than in other elongated skulls found here and there. But it so happened that at that time I only knew about 5 initial races that participated in the formation of modern human populations. I did not know about the great race of great subrace at that point. And I joined the traces of what would become to be a gray race and of the red race in one type. This is understandable because such mix is very frequent in modern men. The fact that the phenotype of the red race, the pure phenotype, is seldom found in modern humans. If you want to know more details about this, you can visit and watch my previous video called The Sixth Race. Not so long ago, after I made clear for me what were the red race traits and which the gray race traits. I happened to watch again the photos of the Paracas skulls and their reconstruction, where in a moment it all made sense. As they say, one picture speaks for thousands of words. So let me show you some of these pictures. With all this, I don't think really there's some space left for doves. The genes of these elongated skulls are present in modern people. The places where we mostly find these influences of this elongated skull race is the Western Eastern Mediterranean, Middle East, Northern Africa, the Caucasus Mountains, some parts of Central Asia, India, and Mesoamerica. Such phenotypes as the littorid and the northern Mediterranean have substantial amount of genes of the elongated skull race. That part is even higher in such phenotypes such as Armanid and Arabid. Surprising results. From the samples, only the mitochondrial DNA from the mother side, could be extracted. Out of the 4 hair samples, one of them couldn't be sequenced. The remaining 3 hair samples all showed a haplogroup, a genetic population group of H2A, which is found most frequently in Eastern Europe and at a low frequency in Western Europe. The bone powder from the most elongated skull tested came back as T2B, which originates in Mesopotamia and what is now Syria, essentially the heart of the Fertile Crescent. It rewrites history as we know it, said Marduli, which, in the most obvious way, lays out a direct link between modern populations of those areas and the elongated skull race. Here is a photo of a Syrian. I think this picture speaks for itself already. Those of you who have a better spirit of observation may ask, why do some of the Paracas skulls have light hair or red hair? Is there an explanation to this? Actually, there is. Even those from Paracas are not purebred representatives of the elongated skull race or of the gray race. They are hybrids of the gray race with the modern men. Is there any substantial and valid evidence for this? At South Charleston, Western Virginia, there have been found many burial mounds, which were very similar to the burial mounds which the Scythians had. What's most intriguing about these burial mounds is that within them there have been found not skeletons of common people living in Northern America, such as those that belong to Native American tribes that we know of, but there have been found skeletons of giants, which measured around 2 to 3 meters of height. Here's a reconstruction from one such skeleton from that site. Let's take a closer look to his face. This one stands a long way from looking like a Native American, doesn't he? If we were to take off all his headwear, it will be possible for us to easily acknowledge in him the traits of European people. To the left, you have a reconstruction of the Cro-Magnon man from Stone Age. But let's get back to our giant. Besides him being a close lookalike to the Europeans, he also has a very large and slightly elongated skull. Here is another reconstruction from Ohio, which was also found in a burial mound a little less than 160 miles away from the South Charleston burial mound. To the right you can see a reconstruction based on a skull of Paracas. And to the left you have a Cro-Magnid European phenotype representation, which mostly has the genes of the white race. It's quite easy to observe the gradient from the left to the right. Let us take another look at what was previously found to be the gray race. Based on all we saw today, it so results this portrait is incomplete. It so may seem, but we have to take into account that this portrait was based on the phenotypes of modern people. So it's still quite valid, but not as much for the gray race, such as for the gray subrace, which would actually be a hybrid between modern man and the initial gray race, which has the elongated skull. If you watched the previous video, you already know that to this we will add the skin of a grey tone, along with the blue blood because of the presence of hemocyanin, the sexual dimorphism. This portrait already leaves not a little doubt in its extraterrestrial origin. The purpose of this film is not to prove or disprove the fact that some organisms living today on our planet did not originate here. If you're interested in this, you can watch the last part of my very first video called Evolution and Human Races. Where did these gray-skinned beings come from? Direct proof and evidence we do not have at the moment, but let us find the most probable version by investigating the human history. And notably, we will go investigating human history, searching for traits of this race. And the first thing that strikes the eyes is the unusual skull shape. Here is what I found. So results that the skull shape or the hat shape, which repeats the skull shape of the gray race, not only is a sign of power, it also seems to give the owner of such a shape the rights to the power, being that power either material or spiritual. What's also intriguing that in the most cases the conic shape of the head or of the hat is most commonly associated with a scepter, a wand, or similar objects and symbols of power. Similar shapes and traits were found in Mesoamerica, Egypt, ancient India, Sumer or Mesopotamia, and some more. This one is especially obvious in the Christian Church, most notably in the Catholic Church. Even a more interesting thing, if we are to compare the role of the bearer of such a hat, which repeated the skull shape of the grey race, present in the most cultures, we'll have quite interesting results on the outcome. In ancient Egypt, we have the pharaoh, which was said to be the son of God. More or less the same happened in ancient India, Mesopotamia, and all the others. At the Jews of Old Testament, the high priest was the one most close to their God, and who also happened to be the one who conducted all the sacrifices made in the name of their God. In the Catholic Church, the Catholic high priest has a title of the slave of all the slaves of God, which means the main slave with supervision rights, to watch over the rest of the slaves. The conic shape elongated hat is the symbol of power, and the scepter or the wand is the way which that power is expressed. So let's resume. Such cases are found among very distant territories, distant kingdoms formed of different people, among the course of thousands and thousands of years. As for me, this is no coincidence. But let's go further. In ancient Egypt, we find traces of human sacrifice, where the slaves of a rich man were also sacrificed at the death of their lord. Human sacrifice was practiced among some temples of some gods. In ancient India, human sacrifices destined to the goddess of death was a common practice thousands of years ago, and it still happens to this day, even if in smaller numbers. The same we find in ancient Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica. Ancient Jews and other similar people also practiced human sacrifices, even if later they transform into animal sacrifices. What about the Christian Church? Let us remember at least the Inquisition or the genocide of Cathars in Western Europe, which were burned alive by thousands in the course of many months. We can also recall the introduction of Christianity to the Kievan Rus by Vladimir Krasnosolnozhko, after which the 12 million population reduced to 3 million, but already a Christian one. If we were to open the history books, they say that these weren't any human sacrifices, but were just simply holy wars against people who thought differently and chose to have a different faith. But if we had to look at the traits and features of how these people were punished and killed, we see a lot of ritualic traces in this. Another interesting story makes that of the Dogon people from Mali, Western Africa. In their cosmogonic myths, we find quite interesting information. For example, they knew long before the invention of the telescope that the star Sirius A has another star which orbits it, called today Sirius B by the astronomers. These Dogon people knew hundreds and hundreds of years ago that that star has a period of revolution of approximately 50 years, which was confirmed by the astronomers not so long ago. Besides that, take a look at the form, shapes and color of their masks. Here's what their mythology says. For Dogons, the sky and everything that connects to it is very important. In the Dogon myth, it says that the sky was made by the bog Amma. He was the first to create the first living beings of the earth. They're known as Nomo. These same first beings of a planet were bodiless spirits, but in a contradictory way, sometimes these bodiless spirits are described as amphibian hermaphrodite beings similar to the fish. Here's an interesting photo of wood carving. Here's what some people found in America. May everyone make their own conclusions. Here it is said that some investigators, together with the theoretical physicists, agree that these stones are very old and they're authentic. Some of them even claim they're as old as 27,000 years. But that's not as important. The most important thing is that these stones were made by someone, and that someone took his inspiration from somewhere. Of course, nowadays it is thought to be unprofessional and not a sign of real evidence when citing mythology, but all the needed proof were already brought. This may you consider only as an addition. The following is a translation from Russian. The brief summary of a very probable explanation. Some representatives of a highly developed technocratic civilization landed on Earth in ancient times. They presented themselves to the Aborigines as gods, and those Aborigines started studying them. Based on the anthropomorphic sculptures of the Ubaid culture in Mesopotamia, the long-headed grey aliens were not the only ones to visit Earth in that time. Most likely because on Earth in that time existed a force which both of these alien races feared. The new-made grey gods needed tools or slaves to fulfill their agenda here. Out of the slaves which were most abiding and active were gifted with cylindrical hats which repeated the skull shape of the gods, which was also a sign to identify them among all the other slaves and make clear for everyone that these ones are the one most close to the gods. Another gift from the new-made gods were the scepter or the wand, which most probably had a more functional purpose. The first one probably was to punish those slaves which did not fulfill the desire of the gods, and the second one would have been most probably to express the power of the gods and make it visible among the other slaves. A simple analogy here can be brought. You might imagine what would happen if someone will go to a primitive tribe and give to one of the aborigines an automatic rifle. Well, when all the other tribesmen possess only stones and sticks. I think the conclusion is pretty obvious in this case. As the time passed, the grey-skinned gods started to mix their genes with their aborigine slaves. This way, the royal and priest dynasties, the representatives of these royal families, started to mix with their servants in time also. As a result, the traits of the grey race started to spread among the modern human populations in massive amounts. Here we can add that the first hot points of the early agriculture and of the growth of cereals which are rich in copper started more or less in the same regions in which the monotheistic religions appeared, and in the same places we find a large history of human sacrifices with ritual meaning. Ancient Mesoamerica, ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, India, Central Asia, and more. Further, the people received the genes of their gods, and they starting to resemble them, as physically so psychologically. If we are to remember the traditions in ancient Rome, late Ellada, the medieval era, and even in the modern democratic world. By this, my purpose is not to instigate some fear, hate. By this I only mean to show that the people are different and those differences lie in their genes, and that those differences are to be inherited. In all this, the social norms, the environment, and the education are all secondary forces, the primal being the genetic. But everyone may think for themselves. If you want to take this as a fairy tale, it is your choice. The main tasks have been completed and the main questions have been answered. That's all for today, folks. See you another time.